Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports with another football video, and today I'm going over my final 2021 NFL Power Rankings. All of the games have been played. Every single game of the season is over. We now know where every team stands, and these are my final NFL Power Rankings. In the dumpster fire, we have the Giants, the Panthers, the Jaguars, and the Jets. The Jaguars and Jets attempted to improve throughout the entirety of the season. The Giants and the Panthers did not. The Giants and Panthers both started off fairly decently, but they never, ever got any better. The Panthers started off 3-0. The Giants started off, I believe, 2-2. Both of those teams capped at 4 wins and then just stayed there. I think the Panthers might have gotten a 5th. The Jaguars capped off their season this week with a very impressive game by Trevor Lawrence. They beat the Colts, keeping them out of the playoffs. And although they only played a very few number of impressive games, they did have some impressive games in there, and their team overall did improve throughout the season. The Jets had a pretty decent run at different points, especially last week. They almost beat Tampa. They had some really good games. Overall, they did improve throughout the entirety of the season, and the Jets and the Jaguars at this point look better than the Giants and the Panthers do. Next, we have the Lions, the Bears, and the Falcons, and these teams had some fight. The Lions finished 3-13-1. They did finish with 3 wins. They beat the Packers this week, 37-30. They beat who are the best team in the league, although Aaron only played for half of the game. They beat the Cardinals earlier in the season, and they beat the Vikings. All 3 of those games against pretty decent teams, all towards the end of the season. They also tied with the Steelers, so they had some really good games against some really good teams. Overall, though, they were the worst team in the league for a lot of the year, even though they started to pick it up towards the end. Took Jared Goff a while to get used to the system, etc. The Bears were just the Bears. Not really much to be said. They had some good games towards the end of the year. And the Falcons were the Falcons. I mean, the Bears and the Falcons do the same thing every year. Potential for next year, we have the Texans, the Washington football team, and the Seahawks. The Texans definitely have potential for next year. Davis Mills looked really good towards the end of the most of the season. He looked really good, especially the past few games. They do need to add some more pieces. They need some more on offense. They need some more defense. They got rid of a lot of players, but they did a lot more with a lot less than people expected them to do. And so I give them props for that, and I think that they're going to improve next year. Washington started off okay. They had a really good streak in the middle, and then they ended off really poorly. All that being said, they only really lost to good teams, and they did have some good games against some of the better teams that they played. Overall, they had a pretty decent season, and I think that Taylor Heinicke is still adjusting and progressing as a quarterback. And I know a lot of people last year said when they went 7-9 that this year they'd be better. They were 7-10, so they didn't really change at all. But I think that next year there is room for improvement, and I think that they could potentially be fighting for that wild card spot. As for the Seahawks, they started off poorly. They started off okay. They were 2-2. Then Russell Wilson got injured, which didn't help. And that was the first time in his career he was injured. He had to deal with some adversity of the injury, getting back from it, dealing with it. And towards the end of the season, their offense looked back to normal, especially this week when they beat Arizona. They also beat the Niners twice. They had some really good games in there, but overall they finished 7-10. Not a very impressive season, but they'll definitely look back like Seattle next year with 9, 10, or 11 wins. Solid overall season, we have the Broncos, the Vikings, the Browns, and the Ravens. The Broncos started off 3-0. They finished 7-10 or 8-9. I don't remember which one. They had a pretty solid year. They had a really hard schedule. They did decently with it. They won a lot of good games. But overall, I don't think that they were clearly better than everyone below them. I don't think that they were better than anyone above them. The Vikings had arguably one of the hardest, if not the hardest schedule of the entire league. They did decently with it. They weren't able to make the playoffs. They had a couple bad games towards the end of the season. But they did finish 8-9 in perfect Kirk Cousins fashion. And they had a decent year. The Browns finished 7-10. Oh no, they finished 8-9. Sorry, they won this week against the practice squad Bengals. They started off really strong. That a lot of people thought that they're going to be it this year. I never believed in it. They had a lot of injuries. They had a lot of bad luck. Nick Chubb had injuries. Baker Mayfield had injuries. Their whole team had injuries. But overall, it was a pretty solid season. They missed the playoffs, but they did pretty decently overall. And the Ravens finished 8-9 as well. They started off really strong. They started off 8-3, and then they lost their last 6 games of the season once Lamar Jackson got injured. Lamar Jackson was, I believe, 7-3. They were 8-3. They were 1-6 without him, losing 6 in a row. Most of those games by 3 points or less. Only one of them wasn't a 3-point loss or less. A lot of them had to do with bad coaching decisions, such as going for it to avoid overtime multiple times. And then in the last game of the season, they didn't go for it, and it went into overtime and they lost. So they had a lot of bad luck, unable to finish games, and that's because Lamar had a lot of game-winning drives and fourth quarter comebacks in the time that he was playing, and then when he was gone, they didn't have that available to them anymore. The Chargers were another team that started off extremely strong and fizzled out. I thought the Chargers would potentially be a Super Bowl contender this year. They had a really good end of the season last year. They started off, I believe, 5-2, and then they slowly fizzled out over time. Decent season, but they were very moody. They were very up and down, much like everyone else in this category. The Eagles started off poorly. They strengthened up a little bit, got into the playoffs, and then their last few weeks were a little bit shaky. They did very poorly in both of their games against Dallas, which I was surprised because it's a divisional matchup. I would think that they would play better, and it's a playoff game. The Eagles were 1-6 against teams with a winning record. They finished 9-8, so they beat a lot of teams that they should have beaten, but they lost to everyone that they had a chance to beat someone better than themselves. And I think that that's really hard for me to say, oh, they deserve to be in the playoffs when they're 1-6 against playoff competing teams. They had a decent season. They are continuing their season. I don't expect them to win any games in the playoffs, considering their first game of the season is against Tom Brady. But they had a decent run, and I think that next year they could definitely be something. Jalen Hurts looked really good this year. The Saints are at 16. They had a lot of injuries. They started off 5-2. They lost their quarterback. Michael Thomas never played. Alvin Kamara got injured. Mark Ingram got injured. Everyone got injured. Half their defense was injured, and it was still one of the best defenses in the league. They did miss the playoffs, so it's hard for me to put them a lot higher than this. They even won the game that they needed to win in order to make the playoffs, but the Niners were able to secure their spot due to tiebreakers. Not tiebreakers. They lost the tiebreaker to the Eagles because they lost to them. But the Saints had a really good season overall, and I think that next year they're going to be really strong again, especially with a starting quarterback and without all their injuries. And the Dolphins I have at 15. They finished 9-8. They started off 1-7 and they finished 9-8. They actually made a serious playoff run, and they could have gotten in potentially if they were able to win another game in there somewhere. They had a really bad middle of the season, but they turned it around. They had a run of easy teams, granted, but then they started beating some tough teams. They beat the Ravens, they beat the Patriots. The Titans were a roadblock for them, but they did finish very strongly. They beat the Patriots twice. They had a really good season. Rising up and falling down, we have the Cardinals, the Patriots, and the Colts falling down, and the Steelers and Raiders rising up. At 14, I have the Colts. The Colts lost the only game that they needed to win, and it was the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know it's a divisional game. I know they've lost 6 in a row or whatever in Jacksonville, but if you recover from a 1-4 team and you become a 9-7 team and you need to win a game to make the playoffs, you gotta win that game. You really do, especially if it's the Jacksonville Jaguars. They were 9-6. And then they lost not only to the Raiders, but to the Jaguars. Not only the Jaguars, but the Raiders. And the Raiders got their playoff spot because the Raiders deserved it. Jonathan Taylor carried the team. Carson Wentz had a pretty decent season overall, but he didn't do anything impressive. Their defense was mediocre, but overall they just couldn't do what needed to be done when it needed to, and they just needed to beat the worst team in the league, and they were in the playoffs, and they couldn't do it. They did beat the Cardinals. I almost put them above the Cardinals, but the fact that they missed the playoffs made it hard for me to do that. The Cardinals had a really rough end of the season. They only are in the playoffs because they had a really great start to the season. They also, like Seattle, ran into injuries with their quarterback, and Kyler Murray has not looked the same since he came back. DeAndre Hopkins was injured for a lot. Chase Edmonds was injured for a lot. A lot of their team had a lot of injuries. They were able to pursue through them, but even when they got their players back, the last few weeks have been rough. And this week they lost to Seattle, the team that has been really inconsistent and overall bad this year. They lost to the Rams when they needed to beat them in order to win the division. They did beat the Cowboys last week, so they have had a lot of really good games. I think that they've won more than they've lost against winning teams. But overall, they've been underwhelming. Steelers I have at 12, and Patriots I have at 11, and Raiders at 10. The Steelers are 9, 7, and 1. The Raiders and Patriots are 10 and 7. And the Steelers have had a much harder schedule than the Patriots have. But overall, I think that the Patriots played a better season. I think that they are a better team right now going into the playoffs. And I think that the Steelers' offense is still a little bit too inconsistent. The Patriots' offense is also very inconsistent, but the defense usually makes up for it. The reason I have the Raiders ahead of the Patriots is because the Raiders are a better team. The Patriots have all of the stats. They have way better offensive stats, defensive stats, and point stats. But the Raiders win the games. The Patriots were 9 and 4. The Raiders were 6 and 7. Now the Raiders are 10 and 7, and the Patriots are also 10 and 7. The Raiders have won their last 4 games in a row. The Patriots have only won 1 of their last 4 games. And that's because they only needed to. But if you're playing the Colts, if you're playing the Bills, and if you're playing the Dolphins, 3 AFC teams fighting for playoff spots, if you want to look like a serious contender, you need to be one of those 3 teams. They didn't beat any of them. They beat the injured Titans. They beat the injured Browns. They beat the Chargers. They beat the Bills in a windy game. They haven't had any real good, serious, quality wins. And I was tempted to put the Steelers above them, but the Steelers have looked really shaky, and they can't win games by more than a few points. As for the Raiders, they are 6 and 3 against teams with a winning record. Their stats are horrendously bad. They're 20th in passing yard. They're 20th in total yards, total points, yards allowed, points allowed. 20th in everything. They're 31st in takeaways. But they've won the games that they needed to win. And that's the difference. They've been winning games recently. They started off strong. They had a bad middle. They finished off really strong. And right now they deserve to be in the top 10. Strong contenders with the Bills, the Rams, the 49ers, and the Cowboys. The Bills are at 9. They really haven't impressed me a whole lot. They did beat the Dolphins twice. That was before the Dolphins started winning games. They split with the Patriots. They've had a really strong season. They have. They also had a very easy schedule compared to a lot of other teams. I can't really put them above any team that's above them. I think the 9 is the perfect spot, because I think that they are definitely considerably stronger than everyone else that I have already mentioned, but they're definitely not stronger than anyone above them. The Rams are at 8, and the Niners are at 7, and the reason I have the 49ers above the Rams is because the 49ers have played much better recently. The Rams are 6 and 4 in their past 10 games. The 49ers are 7 and 3. 49ers are 8 and 3 in their last 11. They also have played a lot more strong teams in that time frame, and they've won a majority of those games. The Rams have only beaten one team with a winning record in that 6 and 4 span, and they've lost to 4. They've lost to 4 teams. And the one win they had was splitting with Arizona. They beat Arizona once, and they lost to them once. They lost to the 49ers twice. And the fact that the 49ers beat them twice, I couldn't justify putting them any lower than the Rams. I have the Cowboys at 6, because, once again, I want to put them in the elite, but they still can't beat teams that aren't in their division. Even Arizona. They split up Arizona could have had a 5-game losing streak, but they split up Arizona's losing streak because they just can't beat good teams. They just can't do it. They beat the Eagles twice, sure, but the Eagles have only beaten one team with a winning record. So, it was the injured Saints. And then the NFL's elite, we have the Packers, the Titans, the Bengals, the Chiefs, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have the Packers at 1, Titans at 2, Bengals at 3, Chiefs at 4, and Bucs at 5. The Packers have been the number 1 team the majority of the season. They remain to be the number 1 team. Tennessee started off really strong. They looked like the second best team in the league. Then Derrick Henry got injured. They looked like the best team in the league at some points. Derrick Henry got injured, A.J. Brown got injured, Julio Jones got injured. Their whole team was injured. They lost a few games. They're 11-2 when A.J. Brown is on the field. A.J. Brown is back. Derrick Henry's coming back. The Titans are back, baby. They beat the Dolphins 34-3. Their defense has gotten better and better and better. They even won a lot of decent games against strong teams when they were missing players. So the Titans are definitely number 2. The Bengals recently beat Kansas City, and Joe Burrow has thrown for 950 yards and 8 touchdowns in his last 2 games. The Bengals look really scary. The Chiefs haven't looked fantastic. They looked decent against the Bengals. They looked really decent. And then this week, they played a really okay game against the Broncos. The Chiefs are arguably better than the Bengals, but I like to flow with the flow, and the Bengals look better than Kansas City right now. Not by a whole lot. They look pretty similar, but the Bengals beat them recently, and the Bengals are looking really strong. I have Tampa at 5 because I really can't put them above Kansas City right now, but they are 13-4. They did have a really good season, and although they lost to the Saints twice and they lost to Washington, they really didn't lose a lot of games that mattered. They lost to the Rams, I guess, which didn't really hurt them a whole lot. That was a long time ago, and they're still the number 2 seed. If they had won that game, I guess they would have beaten the Packers for the 1 seed, but overall, Tampa's had a very strong season, and they're definitely an elite team. It's not really much else to be said. And they have Tom Brady, so thank you guys for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to comment your thoughts down below, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Peace.